In 2011, Supergiant Games put out their first game Bastion on the 360 and the PC that was met with critical and consumer praise. A year after their second release Transistor, the studio is putting Bastion on the PS4 and PS Vita finally. In a time where the re-release of games is an industry standard, Bastion is a welcome addition to the PlayStation family. There's not much that can be said about Bastion that probably hasn't been said already, but instead, we did another playthrough and asked the question, is the game as great as we remember? Supergiant Games have made a name for themselves over the past 5 years, so it's a very retrospective journey back to the world of Calandia. For those who don't already know, Bastion is an action role-playing game that uses an isometric viewpoint. You play as the kid who wakes up on one of the few pieces of his city that is left from the destruction from an event that is referred to as the Calamity. The kid travels to other separated parts of the world and comes across various terrains, monsters, and upgradable weapons in search of shards that can ultimately reconstruct the Bastion and the rest of Calandia. The visuals of Bastion are just as bright and colorful, if not more so, on the PS4. The background art used in the game is substantially more vibrant in comparison to last gen. The shapes and colors are much more noticeable this time around than they were originally. However, color brightness is about the only thing that has seemed to change with the new version. The PS4 version of the game is the same game that you may have played before, but that is not a bad thing. While other games may add extra content to their releases or tout 60 frames per second, the developers decided not to add any gimmicks. Adding new items or stages to the game would have bogged down the game's narrative, as there is already so much substance with Bastion's plot, so it was a relief just to play the game as it was originally intended to be. We would be in the wrong if the voice work of Logan Cunningham was not mentioned. If there were any other voice that could have been used as the narrator, Bastion would not be the game that it is. His soulful interpretation of the narrator is the first thing you hear in the game and sets the tone for Bastion, and to be honest, we're not sure if we would have liked the game without it. The narrator in general tells not only the story, but the backstory of Bastion as well without having to use flashbacks, so the player is consistently attacking and walking through the levels. Most of the flashback details are done through dream sequences in which the player or players are fighting off waves of enemies. This is a great mechanic, but a flawed one throughout the game. If anything negative could be said about Bastion, is that while the storytelling is great, the problem is that the plot gets very dense towards the latter half of the game that may make it hard to keep up with as you are consistently in battle while the narration is happening. By the end of the game, we were not completely sure on why the events of the Calamity happened, nor were we sure about how to end the game when given a choice on how we wanted it to end. To listen to the narration sometimes, you almost have to stop and try to avoid enemies just to absorb it. Another possible unsung hero is the musical score that was produced and composed by Darren Korb. Somehow Korb managed to mix an acoustic soundtrack that gives the world a more fantasy sound. We would describe it as a soundtrack that belongs in a spaghetti western science fiction world like Firefly or Cowboy Bebop. Not only that, but he also wrote the lyrics for a few of the songs as on the soundtrack. The blend of music separates this game from the rest and will go on to do so a few years later when the studio releases their second game, Transistor. Bastion on the PS4 is the same game that we remember. The colors are more vibrant and the soundtrack is still great. While we found some issues with the narrative and being able to understand it, that didn't inhibit the enjoyment of playing it again. It was a time for Bastion to come to PlayStation Market, and we're lucky that it has. We give Bastion a 5 out of 5. For more review and articles, please visit highscorereviews.com. For more video reviews, take a look at the Nerd Theory channel on YouTube.